In our first video, we learned how to boost our frame rates on our Steam Deck. In the second, we introduced the balance between our performance and our visual quality. Today, we're closing out our Steam Deck optimization series, focusing in on battery life. Everything in life is a compromise. In our everyday well-being, we get to pick between sleep, exercise, and work. And of course, we can only pick two. And you guys can tell what I've been picking lately. When it comes to making products, we always want to find a product that is both cheap, is made of high quality, and of course gets delivered to us fast. Unfortunately, we only get to pick two. And our more pressing issue today is of course gaming on our Steam Deck. We want to have good performance, we want to have good quality, and of course, great battery life. But we can only get to pick two. Valve had to cut a few corners when it came to producing the Steam Deck, and unfortunately, the battery size is one of those compromises, and it's just one of the smallest batteries in the entire lineup. Weighing in at 40 watt hours, it's just not a lot of juice for getting those long extended gaming sessions. In my 2 months of gaming and testing on my Steam Deck, I have found that the CPU or APU is able to consume about 12 to 15 watts when left unchecked and uncapped. Of course, we can't forget the rest of the components of the Steam Deck, like the screen, the memory, the controller components, and all those other things. Those usually come in right at about 10 watts of power consumption. So adding that all up, the deck usually can come up to right at 25 watts of power consumption, which, if you do the math, that's a little bit less than 2 hours of total battery life. And let's go ahead and cook up some theoretical numbers. We hit 2 hours of battery life if the APU is running right at about 10 watts. We're going to need to reduce our power consumption to between 3 to 5 watts of APU power to gain an additional hour of battery life. But keep in mind, as we lower how hard the deck is working, other components of the deck consume less energy too. So back to our compromise: performance, quality, and battery life. I've got a handful of games from my stable of benchmarks, and I'm going to show you how tweaking your settings will impact how long you're going to be able to game on your deck. Let's start off with a channel favorite with Doom Eternal. Id Software has developed a very well optimized game, and its dynamic resolution scaling mode is going to be able to get us right at 60 FPS to go slay some demons. At native resolution and medium detail settings, we're burning that top end of 25 watts of power, which is less than desirable. Suppose we change our output resolution to 1152 by 720p. In that case, we engage Steam Deck's FSR and effectively guarantee a crisp 60 FPS experience at the same wattage. Going down to 600p, again engaging GameScope's FSR upscaling, we managed to shave off a couple of watts of power. A good result, but not enough for a solid 2 hours of gameplay. Fortunately, 500p is just above the balanced FSR setting, and we come in right at 19.1 watts of power, scoring a solid 2 hours of battery life at 60 FPS. That is phenomenal. Of course, there are a few other levers we can pull to improve our battery life even further, but to me, medium detail settings at 60 FPS and getting pretty decent battery life, that's a great compromise. Now, we got some bad news. Cyberpunk 2077 is an extremely heavy AAA game on the graphics and CPU department, and a lot of you guys have been waiting for me to optimize this game. While running around Night City, it is difficult to get reliable frame rates above 40 FPS. So from a performance perspective, I'm going to have to sacrifice and drop down to a locked 30 FPS at low detail settings. To do that, we go into settings, go over to video, engage VSync at 30, enable maximum FPS, and set that value to 30. When standing idle at the staircase outside of V's apartment, we're getting hammered with heavy CPU utilization. There's just no way past that. And all of our GPU focused tweaks only save us about a watt. Not a great compromise. Even if we manage to move to a more GPU intensive spot with less action in the scene, we do get a bit more savings, but it's not a lot to write home to mom about. So for me, I'll have to sacrifice both battery life and gameplay performance to improve how my game looks, sticking to a VSync 30 FPS experience with FSR set to quality. You might also want to try the graphics at medium, since we're already at the top end of battery consumption. But it's not all doom and gloom for graphically intensive AAA games. The Witcher 3 plays very well on the Steam Deck, even at my recommended settings from last week's video. At this setting, we sit just about 55 FPS and consume 25 watts. We have plenty of margin to save some frames and power. Engaging the Steam Deck's quick access menu and setting our refresh rate to 40 Hz sets us up for success. At native resolutions, we hit 15 watts of system power, just shy of 3 hours of playtime. Unfortunately, kicking in FSR doesn't save us as much energy as we'd hope, but we'll take everything we can get at this point. If you want to sacrifice a bit more performance, 30 FPS is available, but it's a bit tricky to engage. I had to set the game to unlimited FPS and set VSync turned on for the CPU and GPU utilization to get in check. From there, we are sitting at 13 watts of system power, breaking the illustrious 3-hour barrier. So now, what do you choose? Do you go with 30 FPS to buy that additional 20 minutes of battery life, or do you stick with the more fluid 40 Hz experience? To me, I think 40 Hz looks fantastic and is well worth the battery compromise. So how about an MMO? Final Fantasy XIV plays very well on the Steam Deck and it has superb controller support. When hanging out in Revenant's Toll, I can hit 60 FPS with no problem on the high laptop preset. Battery life, it isn't great here, but I can only stomach so much main story questline before I need to take a break. But for those of you looking for a bit more battery life, just like in The Witcher 3, 40 Hz mode is where it's at, like 2 turntables and a microphone. This will net you about 3 hours of battery life. However, I do not recommend using 30 FPS in this game since the action on the screen is very quick. The game feels just a bit too choppy to warrant the impressive 11 to 12 watts of power consumption with Final Fantasy's built-in 30 FPS mode. Last up, I had to revisit Red Dead Redemption 2. In last week's video with my recommended settings, I claimed that we were going to be able to hit a solid 40 FPS when out in the wilderness, but when we go into town, we do start to dip into the 30s. Cranking back on the recommended settings from last week and focusing on power consumption, yikes, on second thought, I think I've changed my mind. At my previous recommended settings, we're able to shave off a couple of watts by going down to 40 Hz with FSR engaged, but holy cow, 15 watts at 30 FPS is a fantastic experience. As much as I like my old recommendations, extra fidelity and performance, an extra hour of battery life, it's well worth the solid performance hit. With all 3 videos now under our belt, I have a few golden rules when it comes to gaming on the Steam Deck. Step 1, find out the game's frame rate and see just how well it plays on the Steam Deck. If a game has to be at 60 FPS, that's gonna be quite a challenge. For others, 40 Hz is a good compromise and it's well worth trying out. And if all else fails, 30 FPS is a decent fallback option, especially in heavier AAA games. At that point, find out how to engage VSync for your specific game, and make sure that the utilization numbers for the CPU and the GPU line up with your expectations. As for 40 Hz, make sure you go into that quick access menu and dial back that setting appropriately. Next, how good do you want the game to actually look? To me, when I play on my Steam Deck, I try to shoot for medium quality settings, and if I've got a bit extra FPS to spare, I might bump up some settings to high. But if a game isn't able to maintain your desired frame rate, you could dial back some settings like shadows or texture quality, or turn on FSR. Now I know some games do not support this technology, but fortunately GameScope is included by default, and as long as the game supports resolutions lower than 800p, I definitely recommend it. Go into your settings and engage 1152 by 720p or any other compliant 16 by 10 resolution. It will instantly buy you a few frames. That might be enough to keep your settings up without sacrificing the clarity of your game. If all else fails, going down to 500p, it's okay, but past that point, you're going to need to go and get your eyes checked. Lastly, take a look at your battery life. Make sure you got your performance overlay on at least to level 2 and see what your game's cooking. If you're comfortable with 2 hours of battery life, try to balance your frame rate, resolution, and your settings to hit about 20 watts of total system usage. Decreasing your frame rate is the best way to hit your goal if you need more battery life, followed closely by its resolution. But we gotta keep in mind, guys, not every game is gonna play well on the Steam Deck. It definitely has its limits. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, Horizon Zero Dawn, and even God of War, there's just not a lot of things we can do to optimize for our frame rates, detail settings, or our battery life, and what we see is what we get. At the end of the day, we have to respect the Steam Deck's limits, and it's our job to balance the performance, the quality, and the battery life. But of course, you can only pick two.